Hello and welcome to a series of videos dedicated to working with Microsoft Access. This is part 1. Each video will contain about 20 minutes worth of material. So if you remember, in class we discussed that each information system has 4 major parts: input, processing, storage, and output. Microsoft Access has the same 4 major parts. Input is done through the user forms. Processing is done by writing special commands in a language called SQL, Structured Query Language. Storage is organized in form of tables that are linked to each other. And output is something that's called reports. So today we are going to spend some time and learn how to do and create tables in Microsoft Access. So let's get started. First of all, let me show you what we discussed in class. The point of discussion was a service organization who employs employees, people who work for clients of this company. Typical organization like that can be a law office or consulting practice or accounting, taxation firm. So these type of companies that provide service to their clients, typically they don't care a lot of physical inventory. Their main asset is employees' knowledge. So we send our employees to work on clients' cases, and later the company sends the client's invoice for the time spent by the employees working on their cases. So this is a very simple database structure that you see in front of you. It contains 3 tables. Let's discuss them briefly. Table clients. So this is something that's called data dictionary, or sometimes it's called also table schema. Table clients contains several fields or columns. We discussed that typically when the database are being designed, the very first column or few columns, in case you have a complex situation, is the primary key. So primary key, in order to identify primary key in the data dictionary, we just underline it. So the very first column, client ID. Notice that I don't have a space between the words client and ID. That's done for a reason. If I have a space, then later on, when I write the structured query language command, the access will treat the client as a separate word, possibly a command, from the word ID. And I don't want that. Client ID is supposed to be the name of my column. So therefore, I don't use any spaces. And that's actually a preferred practice when designing tables, not to use spaces. So client ID is a continuous word. That's the name of my column that contains unique identifier, primary key for table clients, and it's underlined to say that this is a primary key. And I have client name, and you can see that instead of inserting space between the word client and the word name, I have an underscore. For me, it's a little bit easier to read as a human being. For a computer, it creates the consecutive string of characters without any parts. So it's one blob of data for the computer. So I'm avoiding using spaces, therefore. Every client has address, and typically address is broken down into 4 parts: street, city, state, and zip code. And also we decided to keep a phone number as a way to contact the client. So it's fairly straightforward. Then now let's discuss the table employees. Just like my table clients, the very first column is the primary key, employee ID, and again I don't have any underscore for exactly the same reason. Employees have first name with an underscore instead of a space, last name with an underscore, social security number, their phone, how I can contact them, position that they hold inside the organization, and also billing rate. Now, what do we mean by billing rate? Typically, when my employees go work for clients, each employee, depending on their position in the organization, has a billing rate. In other words, how much money we're charging our clients for 1 hour worth of work that this employee spent on that client. So for example, if I'm just a consultant, the company may charge $100 per hour for my work. But if I'm a partner, they can charge $250 an hour for my work. So billing rate refers to invoicing the client organizations later on after the work was performed and recorded. Okay, the third table that we have here is work completed. If you remember from our discussion in class, work completed is a junction table. Originally, clients and employees are related as many to many, because one client can have many employees doing work for that client, and on the other hand, each employee may be doing work for multiple different clients on different occasions, of course. But databases cannot have many-to-many relationships inside of them. So therefore, we need to replace the direct relationship between clients and employees by inserting the junction table in between. And that junction table is work completed. And again, I have an underscore instead of space for exactly the same reason. This is the name of the table, and I don't want the computer to think that these are two different words. It's one name. Okay, because work completed is a junction table, as we discussed in class, it must contain primary keys from table clients and table employees. So therefore, I have client ID with an underscore, as you can see, between the words client and ID. And also I have an employee ID, exactly same situation. There is a space, or underscore actually, between the word employee and the word ID. Why do I have underscores here and no underscores in the original tables? That's my personal preference. Client ID technically is a foreign key that comes from the table clients. Employee ID is also a foreign key that comes from the table employees. So when I design the databases, by looking at my tables, I can immediately tell which column is a primary key and which column is the foreign key. So that's the rule that I use. If the field contains an underscore and it's clearly coming from a different table, then this is a foreign key. If name does not contain an underscore, such as client ID, employee ID, these are primary keys. So this is just a way to visually differentiate between the primary key and the foreign key. Now, as you can see, the work date with an underscore between the work and the date is also part of the primary key. Why is that? It may happen that the same employee is sent to work on the same client on more than one occasion, correct? So if I wouldn't include the column work date as the part of my primary key, then I would record same client ID and same employee ID more than once in the table work completed, which will create duplications, and we can have duplicated primary key values. So in order to differentiate, for example, yesterday's work of my employee 001 on the client 005 from today's work of employee 001 on the client 005, I must include the work date because that's the part that is different. So including the work date in my combined primary key creates uniqueness. Even if I send the same employee to work on the same client more than once, the work date will create a different combination. Okay, what else do I want to record about the work done by my employees for clients? Work description. Every time when I send somebody to work for a client, they need to report back and say what exactly they did. Why do I keep that? Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, I like to know myself, right? And number two, later on when I create a report, such as invoice to my client for work done by my employees, I don't just send the total due, I want to send a breakdown of charges, when exactly the work was performed and what exactly was done. So work description is going to be used later on for invoicing purposes. And hours worked is recorded for obvious reasons. The way I invoice my customers is I take billing rate, for example, $100 an hour, multiply by how many hours that employee worked for the client. For example, if they worked 2.5 hours, then it's going to be an invoice for $250. Okay, so this was an introduction. And this is what we're going to create in Microsoft Access first. So let's get started. Go ahead and launch Microsoft Access. And I want to create from the blank database. So immediately Access tells me to name my database. It's a good idea if you work on a computer on campus, for example, not on your own computer, not to save any of your work on this computer. So I would advise you to use the USB flash drive that you carry with you. But I'm going to put my file on the desktop, and I will call my file, let's give it a name, not database 6, but I'm going to call it clients_billing. And after that, I will click the button create. All right, so this is the initial screen. You can see that Microsoft Access splits the screen in two unequal parts. Well, first of all, there is also a space on the top that is that's called a ribbon with buttons on it, and we're going to switch between ribbons later on. But this left part is called navigation pane. There we will see a lot of objects as we progress through this example. So right now there is a group for tables, and there is only one table that Microsoft Access calls Table 1. What I want to do is all these fields that we have discussed in all of my tables, I want to create them in 3 different tables. So let's start with table clients. Therefore, we're going to need columns for client ID, name, street, city, state, zip, and the phone. So let's switch back to Microsoft Access. And on the left side of this ribbon, I have a button view, right? So right now the table is in the datasheet view. In other words, it's ready for the data input. Well, I'm still in the design phase of my database, so let's switch to the design view. Immediately Microsoft Access invites me to give the table a name. So I'm going to call it clients. Click OK, and you can see immediately that table 1 in the group of tables in my navigation pane, the name was changed from table 1 into clients. Okay, if you remember, the very first key was supposed to be client ID. So there is an ID which is generic by default. So I'm going to type client ID. Oops, client. Okay, and very important that I assign each column correct data type. So let's take a look at the data types. Every time when I create a column, I must specify what type of data this column will contain. That's the difference between Microsoft Access and Microsoft Excel. In Excel, each cell in each row in each column can contain whatever you want. You can type a number or you can type a text. Not the case with Microsoft Access. Each time when you create a column, the column will contain only a certain data type that you have to specify. So client ID, if you remember, was our primary key, which means that every record in this table must have a unique identifier. A lot of times databases use numbers as unique identifiers, starting from number 1. So this field, I'm going to use the data type for this field. I'm going to use data type auto number. Auto means that it's outside of my control. Access by itself will create a new number, which is different from all numbers used before, and assign that number as the client ID as I create new records. Description field. You can type anything you want. So this doesn't affect the database. This is just to keep notes about what each field is supposed to contain. For example, I can type over here primary key for table clients. Okay, let's move on. What was the second field? Client name, and then street, city, zip, etc. So I'm going to name my second field just like I have it in the data dictionary. Client client underscore name, don't forget the underscore, and client name is not a number, right? It's not an automatic number. Client name typically is a text. And I have a choice here between short text and long text. Probably the difference is how many characters the field can hold. So typically, name of the organization, which is your client, is fairly short, so I'm going to use short text. Okay, I'm going to skip the description or comments because it's self-explanatory. And I have street. Street is also text, right? And probably it's fairly short, so I'm going to keep it short. Then I have city, and it's also short text. And I have state. Now, state, what I can do with state, it's a short text. But a lot of times the state, the full name of the state, is not recorded. For example, if the company is in Virginia, then instead of the word Virginia, I can keep just 2 characters, VA, correct? And that's standard in the United States. So at the bottom part of this window in Microsoft Access, you can see field properties. So right now I'm in the field state, and it has a lot of different properties. We're not going to use all of them, but let's start with field size. So right now you can see that short text can keep up to 255 characters. I don't need that many, right? So instead of 255, I'm going to type just 2, VA for Virginia, AL for Alabama, etc. Okay? So over here, I'm going to leave the comment abbreviated state name. Okay. All right. Next one, if I remember correctly, was zip code. All right. Zip code. Technically, it's a string of characters, right, or text, because fully specified zip code contains 5 numbers, then 1 dash, and then 4 extra numbers. The format 5+4, so-called 5+4 format, right? So here's what I'm going to do. In the field properties, there is a line called input mask. This is a way how database can control what kind of input it will accept from users like you and me. So let's click on this field, and immediately you can see at the end of this line there is a button with 3 dots on it. Let's click. Alright, it says must save table first. Save it now? Yes. And it's a good idea, obviously. As you go, save frequently. Alright, so what's input mask wizard? Input mask wizard will allow us to create a mechanism how Microsoft Access controls and limits what kind of input it will accept from the users. So we're talking about the zip code. Zip code has a special mask, and right now you can see it's in the format of 5+4. How about I'm going to get rid of the 4 piece, right? So let's click next, and it says, well, here is the mask. Any numbers between 0 to 9 with a dash in between. Well, I'm going to get rid of this part, and that should tell input mask wizard that I want input only in form of numbers, and there should be 5 of them. Placeholder is just a way to show, the remaining numbers. For example, if I use the underscore, here, let's try it. As soon as I click, this is what's going to happen. It will show 5 underscore spaces, and if I try to type something, character, alphabet, it will not accept, and you can hear the noise, right, that's going on. So it will accept only numbers from me. So let me try 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I try to type something else, it doesn't take it because it's limited only to 5 numbers. Okay, so let's click next and let's finish it. All right, so right now it's the field with the restriction on how the input can be processed from users. And the last field I believe that we still are missing is the phone number. So let's type phone in here. And for the phone, I'm going to keep it as a short text as well, because phone is not just numbers. It can be spaces, dashes, and then also brackets. But in the input mask, let's click on the input mask field again. Must save table first. Yes. Okay. So phone number. Typically, phone looks like this, right? So I'm not going to mess with it. I'm going to leave the input mask in this suggested form. I'm happy with that. So let's click finish. Let's click save. And that's our first table. So this is the end of our first video. And at that point, you probably should look at video number 2. We'll keep going, create more tables, and fill it up with dummy data. Okay.